Уважаемый господин председатель, дорогой друг,
Russia and China. These two countries are often portrayed as allies, but is that really the case? Is this relationship really beneficial for both sides, or is there in fact just one clear winner? We looked at data spanning the key political, social, economic, and military domains and found 3 trends to watch that define China-Russia relations. And this first one may surprise you. The area of cooperation that does not immediately come to mind is Russia-China activities in the Arctic. Here, cooperation has increased, but there are also obstacles to expanding it. These include joint projects in resource extraction, energy, and infrastructure. China has gradually expanded its Arctic engagement. It became an observer state in the Arctic Council in 2013, and increasingly describes itself as a near-Arctic state, as well as a great polar power.
When we think about China's and Russia's activities in the Arctic, it's quite clear that Russia is definitely the dominating actor. But this isn't really surprising given that most of the Arctic actually is in Russian territory. So the Arctic region has been very important for Russia's military, energy, and economic strategy. In terms of China, China is not an Arctic state, but China sees itself as an important stakeholder in the Arctic region. China is most involved in Russia and in the Russian Arctic, but has been trying to have a footprint or a larger footprint also with other states. China is interested in the Arctic mainly because of the resources we find there and because of potential future trade routes. So in the Arctic, we find a lot of oil and gas reserves, but also different rare earth elements, which are really important to China.
This cooperation in resource extraction and creating infrastructure is seen, for example, in the Yamal LNG project in Sabeta in northwest Siberia, which ships gas to Asia and to Europe.
These are all very important to China's economy. China has been trying to be involved in resource extraction projects, both with Russia but also with other partners in the Arctic. Regarding trade routes, we believe that climate change will lead to increasing melting ice, and this will open up new shipping routes through the Arctic. Here, the Northern Sea Route is particularly important, which runs through the Russian territory, and China is trying to be involved in developing shipping routes through the Arctic, which can then help it reduce travel times from China to Europe.
But there are also projects that have been facing delays, partly because of suspicion from both sides.
One example is the Power of Siberia 2 negotiations, which have been going on for decades, but there seem to still be ongoing problems between the two sides. So even though we see overall increase in cooperation, the collaboration in this region still seems to be limited and pragmatic.
And there are good reasons why we can expect more developments in this area.
It will be interesting to see to what extent current geopolitical developments in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz might also have influence over negotiations over the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, for example. However, at the moment, there's little reason to believe that the structural factors that at the moment are impeding closer cooperation or finding a deal that both sides are happy with will disappear anytime soon.
This next cooperation might be the most prominent in this relationship. China has been buying Russian oil even before the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but this event supercharged the exchange. And on the surface, it may look like a win-win situation, but the reality is not as clear-cut.
Due to Western sanctions, Russia has been selling more of its oil to China and also at a cheaper price. So in other words, China is getting a discount on Russian oil compared to other global oil prices.
We can see that both the oil trend and the discount trend have gone hand in hand since the invasion of Ukraine. The key underlying drivers of this are Western sanctions, the European import embargo on Russian seaborne oil, and the G7 price cap on Russian oil exports.
And the import embargo, it led to far fewer willing buyers of Russian crude. So China and India were basically the only 2 major ones that still bought Russian oil. And that put them in a very good and strong bargaining position, which let them demand a better price, a discount. But for Russia, it's not only the buyer's discount that Russia has to absorb. The import embargo and the price cap, they also lead to higher transportation costs, which is kind of the second component of Russia's total discount for its oil sales.
Russia has to cover both the buyer's discount and the higher transportation costs for the middleman and the shadow fleet. That means it has to sell its oil at a substantial discount. But Russia still managed to maintain its export throughout the war, and it remains a key factor keeping the Russian economy afloat.
For China, the discount has been a nice kind of economic boost, but not really a game-changing phenomenon. The average discount has been around 8%, saving Chinese importers around $18 billion since the invasion. But for Russia, by contrast, this trade is more or less vital at the moment, and it's kind of an example of one of many examples of the asymmetry in the relationship between China and Russia.
The discount was high at first, then it dropped, reflecting the initial hesitation in purchasing Russian oil when the invasion began. It was followed by a gradual normalization, the growth of the so-called shadow fleet and middlemen networks. And at the end of 2025, the discount went up again as a result of US sanctions on key oil producers Rosneft and Lukoil, reflecting again the risk of buying Russian oil and secondary sanctions connected with the purchase.
But since the Iran war this year, the US has relaxed sanctions enforcement and China has increased its import volumes. So this will likely push down the discount again. Going forward, China's buyers' discount on Russian oil is a useful proxy to continue to monitor, not just only for the demand for Russian oil, but also for a proxy for how seriously Chinese actors take the threat of secondary sanction, especially from the US and Europe. With the current energy crisis brewing in the Persian Gulf, China's appetite for these relatively secure Russian barrels is likely to increase. At the same time, the US is likely to continue to turn a bit of a blind eye to this oil trade to keep global prices lower, to keep Russian oil on the global market. So overall, going forward, exports to China will likely continue or perhaps increase, while the discount is likely to decrease. So this will give a much needed relief to the Russian economy.
It's apparent that China remains central to sustaining Russia's war effort. It accounts for 30% of Russia's imports and exports, while Russia is only 3 to 4% of China's foreign trade. And with growing asymmetry comes growing tension between the partners. Russia's industrial sector is threatened by the inflow of Chinese goods, and a good example of this is the case of the automotive sector.
Before the war, China exported around 15,000 cars, passenger cars a year. In 2024, it was over 1 million. And obviously, it has clear effects on the Russian market, both consumers, who probably are very happy with the inflow of cars, but on the other hand, we have producers that feel pressured. Before Western car producers withdrew from the Russian market, they were present in terms of production. Basically, the Western brands were produced in Russia. With China, it's slightly different. They are more focused on exporting cars from the strong Chinese industrial base and not so much producing them in Russia. In 2019, Chinese brands accounted for 2% of Russian passenger cars market. Last year, it was over 50%. So a huge increase, obviously.
The Russian authorities decided to introduce protectionist measures to mitigate this flow. In 2004, they increased the so-called recycling fee on imported cars by 85%. According to Rhodium Group analysts, this raised the cost of cars by a few $1,000s, which is a significant increase. Despite this, in 2025, China still exported over 600,000 passenger cars, 20% less than in the previous year, but still a significant amount for Chinese exporters.
What's interesting is that the protectionist measures introduced by Moscow were not met with strong retaliation from Beijing. We obviously can clearly see that when we as Westerners try to introduce some protectionist measures to protect our markets from the Chinese competition, Beijing's reaction is often pretty strong. And in case of its Russian ally, Vladimir Putin, who is responsible for the introduction of such protectionist measures, the reaction was not there.
The goal was not to stop the inflow of Chinese cars. Right now, Russia has no other choice but to import vehicles, and no substitution for this. The aim was to establish more local production. And what's important, these measures did not disrupt the good relations between partners.
It's an obstacle, but it's not a complete barrier. So as long as Chinese producers, sellers are still able to somehow find a way into the Russian markets, I guess it's fine. What we should mention is probably that there are other ways to introduce Chinese cars to the Russian market, basically through the third countries. It's not only the case of cars, obviously, that the exports to Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries are later on sent to Russia.
Why is this trend worth watching? For one thing, it's a measure to analyze these divergent interests and shows us if Russia is willing to sustain its industrial base.
It's interesting because we may see if the cooperation between the Chinese and Russian side is growing even stronger, with probably some more FDIs on Russia's soil, and the interest of consumers. How strong do they react to price hikes of cars? How strong is their response to lowering standard of life in Russia? And obviously, what's the role of Russian producers of cars? How close and in which way they are able to cooperate and compete with the Chinese?
This dashboard about the special relationship between China and Russia is a project by the Center for Eastern Studies, the Mercator Institute for China Studies, the Swedish National China Center, and Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. On this website, you'll find even more interactive charts, graphs, and maps on China-Russia relations. The link is in the description.